I'm Jan Visser, meeting with Emily Vargas-Barón. You are one of the authors of a book that we are producing on seeking understanding. And seeking understanding means throughout a lifetime building the scientific mind.
That's right.
Your specific expertise is in the area of children, particularly early childhood development. Mm-hmm. And perhaps you could explain to us what children have to do with the building of the scientific mind.
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here with you and to be able to share some ideas with you about the building of the scientific mind. I am profoundly convinced that really the children are born with a scientific mind. They are beginning to develop, obviously, from the very moment of conception, and they move forward, and approximately 3 months before they're born, their perceptual capacities in terms of seeing and hearing are very fully moving into place. Cognitive development begins right at that point, and there is a great deal of capacity for them to begin real learning processes. And so when in the old days they used to say that children should, in the womb, should listen to good music, that's right, they should. And the mother should be happy, and there should be a sense of wellness and positive thoughts around the mother and child at all times. If the mother suffers trauma, or is under stress, or is impacted by bad prescription drugs that can damage a child, or any type of what are often called street drugs, that all of those things would be injurious to the growing fetus. But a child that is maturing well in the womb and then comes to the point of delivery in wonderful, robust, healthy state, with the mother happily looking forward to the birth of the child. That child has a wonderful, wonderful potential future in development. So we take great interest these days, increasingly, in ensuring good preconception education and care, prenatal education and care, so that mothers and fathers prepare for birth. And we encourage mothers and fathers to talk to their baby, because the baby is learning language, is learning the cadence of the language, the sounds of the language. And the minute that the baby is born, and oftentimes their eyes are wide open, the minute they hear their mother's voice and their father's voice, they orient to that voice, knowing that that's theirs.
The fact that you mentioned preconception education, to me it appears like something rather new. And time that I grew up, or my children, people wouldn't talk about that.
Yes, they didn't.
So how come?
Well, because we have found through a lot of studies in the fields of public health and medicine, as well as in studies of adolescence and parenting, that if the mother is, for example, going to be preparing to have a child, the mother should have adequate quantities of folic acid, should be receiving a good iron in the diet, and if not, have some additional iron given to her at that time. And also we have found that women who are very overweight, obese, in carrying a child, literally it has a negative effect on the growing ovum and all of the development of the child, and is very injurious to the child over time. We used to think of it more in terms of difficult childbirth, but in actual fact it's not good for the growing fetus. So there are many areas, these are just a few of them, preparation. Also you should begin, or parents should begin during that early period preparing for positive parenting.
That means mentally preparing.
Mentally preparing and learning some of the skills they're going to need, and also looking forward to the child and with great happiness, because that will help with the hormonal production in the mother to help with the development of the child during the uterine process. Then upon birth, The parents are ready for the baby. When the baby is born, they look with joy into the face of this miracle that is a child, and they say, "This is my baby, and now I know what I'm going to be doing with it." And they feel greater confidence, and they immediately move and hold the child with more confidence, and are able to take better care of the child.
My feeling about it is that it would also come naturally, that kind of development, at least for me as a parent.
Yes.
It's exactly what happened to me.
And that's wonderful, but it's also because it was natural to you, because you saw that in your life, the lovely family you came from, and I know is the fact. And they prepared you in ways that you never thought about. So you were truly prepared for the joy that were your children.
Oh, wow.
Yes, your parents did it. The parents are very important. In fact, it's really a generational question. We're talking about intergenerational transfer. You have to look at the great-grandparents, the grandparents, the parents, and now the little baby. And it is a continuation there. And that's why in families that have been under stress, that have been suffering, or live in severe poverty, or where there has been stunted growth in the parents or the grandparents, the great fear that we have is that this will have a very negative impact on the growing fetus and on the child to be. So we have to work very hard to overcome what are some very negative tendencies biologically in the child, and then emotionally, because much of this is also genetically linked. So we have a lot to be concerned about. That's why the most important period is preconception, prenatal, and early childhood. And neuroscience, this wonderful new field, has taught us so much about how the infant brain grows. And we're still at the frontier of study in this area. But now we know that at least 80% of the neuronal pathways, the pathways in the brain connecting the synapses, the cells that are where the brain has its different sections dealing with different functions of the brain. These neuronal pathways grow and flourish in the first 3 years of life. In a child who is stunted in growth, you think of that child as small, short, but in actual fact, when you do an fMRI of the brain of a moderate to severely stunted child, you will see they have anywhere from a third to a half fewer neuronal pathways in the brain. And it is
that depends on
very terrifying.
Things like nutrition, but probably also on stimulation.
Absolutely, you're completely correct. Nutrition is very important, and unless there are adequate nutrients going into the body of the child, preferably from breastfeeding, which is the best overall food for the child, especially during the first 6 months of life. But unless that's there, it's going to be a problem. Oftentimes micronutrient deficiencies, such as anemia that comes from a lack of iron, and other types of micronutrient deficiencies, vitamin D, vitamin A, can cause delays, but also the stimulation of the child. I once came upon a child, a beautiful little boy, lying in a crib at 9 months of age, and this child could not lift his head. He could not roll over. He would just lay flat. His mother loved him and just laid him down flat. She didn't know to hold the child, so she just kept the baby in a crib. And the child had virtually no responsiveness. And I went in and I was really concerned. So I did a very quick developmental screening on him, and I said, my goodness, look at this child. This child's beginning to react to a few little touches here and there and different little activities that I did with the child. And I realized that there was hope, because I thought I was looking at a child that was profoundly disabled. It turned out that the child had simply not been stimulated adequately. And within a period of from 9 months to 18 months, that child was already beginning to walk at 18 months of age. But we had to work with that child. He needed intensive and individualized attention to be able to develop the inborn capacity that he had at birth.
Yeah.
but that was not being nurtured by the parent who, as I said, loved her child but didn't know what to do and was just keeping him clean, basically.
So turning to the building of the scientific mind, or the development of the scientific mind, there is a precondition in terms of physical well-being, good nutrition, but there's also the aspect of stimulation, which is the sort of dynamic part of the environment.
Absolutely.
That happens.
It's almost more important than food at times. You can nourish a child well. You can have a child that came from a family where there had been malnutrition, for example. But unless there's adequate stimulation in the home, the child will still appear to be a malnourished child. The body does not take advantage of the nutrients adequately if there is not stimulation. And the stimulation is necessary for the development of the brain. The brain is making connections.
Right.
Even just physical growth and ability in terms of small hand-eye coordination or the development of the large muscles. All of that is related, obviously, to the brain. The brain is stimulating that. But if the child is not stimulated physically, the muscles aren't going to develop. And you have, for example, one of the things that we do with children who are Down syndrome children, who are darling children, and we love those children so much, but they are very weak in their musculature. We call it low tone, but what it is it's that the large muscles do not develop as rapidly as they do in a child who does not have Down syndrome. So you have to work with the child to help them build their muscles. Once you do that, you begin to get them then vertical. You put them on your shoulder and you have them look around. And as quickly as you can, you get them to standing or pulling to stand. And those children who used to be 40 and 50 IQ routinely are today 90 IQ. They usually learn to read and write. I receive letters from children with Down syndrome. They can get up and give a speech. They can do all sorts of things in society. They can help run a farm. They can sell in stores. They can be waiting on tables. It's amazing the wonderful things that they can do. They are aware. They're fully aware that they don't have the same capacity as everybody else, but their happy nature is such that they get along with everybody, and they're wonderful members of society, and they're productive members of society.
Very interesting. That first period of 3 years, are there preferred moments within that period?
This is the question we all ask ourselves. If we just do this at 23 months, what difference will it make? Can we wait until 23 months and then do it? The answer is we don't know the answer to that. And that's one of the great areas of study.
Of course. Does it make a difference?
If you're a parent, you want to do the best at every age of the child. It is those who wish to have an intervention that's only for a short period of time so that they can reduce their cost and do it only in the ripe period for getting the greatest results. Which is an interesting research question, but from the point of view of parenting, a parent wants their child to develop well, all during the period of development from immediately after birth onward. And all of the stimulation, the caring, the nurturing of the baby begins at birth. Literally, immediately putting the baby to the breast, having the baby become part of the family, having everybody hold the baby, giving the baby lots of love from that very minute of bonding. That's what you develop in a child over time. It's very important.
When we say building the scientific mind, we are not necessarily thinking about building scientists. Scientific mind, of course, is a feature that we would like every human being to have. It starts with the children. What in that multidimensional phenomenon of the scientific mind do you think is particularly important to be stimulated? There are so many aspects to it.
There are so many aspects to it. Children, I think, are natural scientists. They learn through exploration. A baby brings anything that it can up to its mouth because it's learning about things through the tactile aspect of mouthing the thing and learning how it tastes, whether it's fuzzy or not, whether they can swallow it. And so a lot of parents want to pull everything from thumbs to toys out of the mouth, even though they're not so small that they would possibly, choke on them. But they think they shouldn't put things to their mouth, but that's how the child is learning. Babies need to learn through their mouth, so that's one of the ways that they explore it first. Hand-eye coordination, learning to reach out, pick and hold something, transfer from one hand to the next. Learn if when they are offered 3 things, to put one under their arm and have one in each. That way they get all 3.
So they learn to learn with their hands, right?
They're learning through their hands. And then that
and that's something
goes on.
that gets lost in later educational experiences very often.
You want to know the worst thing you can do to a child to end their exploration? Slap their hand when they're babies and say, don't do that, and push their hands away and slap them. They will immediately inhibit their desire to reach out and try things. So never, never, never slap a child's hand. You gently move them away and say, now, wouldn't you like to play with this?
I'm glad we never did that.
Yes, exactly.
Even without knowing, there's lots of things, because it's sort of one feels naturally what one should do and not do.
Well, I know that one should never slap a child. One should never hit a child. Only at one time in the whole period of time of rearing my son did I did a one bang, and it was when he went out into the middle of the street. I was running, and I said, you never go through that street. He was just a little one. He was about 18 months. So I took my hand and I went bung, and it made a huge sound, and it didn't hurt him because it was just the sound of it. And he looked at me, I said, yes, I meant it, not in the street. And that was the one time. There are 1,000 different wonderful techniques one can use that are substitutes for corporal punishment of children.
But that is kind of spontaneous behavior, and it's entirely natural.
Absolutely, and every child tries it. And every parent has to face, what am I going to do? It's very difficult. The thing that I think inhibits the scientific mind is anything that inhibits exploration, learning, opportunities to try out different things. I think that that's what's very important, that we must, as parents, do our very best to encourage that exploration. Another thing is creativity. Every baby is creative. And some say, create the creative baby. No, the baby is creative. So it's offering opportunities to play, pots and pans in the house, making noise with a wooden spoon on a pan, listening to how it sounds, having a place where the toys or the pots and pans are stored that the child can play with. All of these things are ways that you help children explore their environment and learn about what's going on. Take going to the ocean shore. Seeing the wonderful shells and exploring different colors of rocks and being a part of things. That is the beginning also of scientific endeavor. Exploring what's the difference between a rock and a shell. What was a shell? Where did a shell come from? What is a fish? How does the fish grow? All sorts of things that you can do actively.
Learning to ask questions.
Learning to ask questions and learning about the parts of things. Taking flowers and plants and gently pulling them apart and looking at what's composed of them, then teaching the child the names of the parts of the flower and what kind of flower it is, what kind of tree it is, what kind of bush, what is medicinal, what isn't. All those wonderful things that you can teach a little one, and they're fascinated by it. Where do mariposas, butterflies come from? Where do butterflies come from? And going through that whole period of the chrysalis and the development of the butterfly, that fascinates children.
One of the other authors in the book actually specializes in doing that with grown-up children. And making them continue that behavior of finding out by doing.
Well, I hate to admit it, but I still learn that way.
Yeah.
Just as a child would. It's wonderful fun and it's rewarding. And if you can do that type of play as an adult with a child, it's even more fun.
Yeah, it's enjoyable for both the child and the parents. Absolutely, I agree.
Right.
There's lots more to learn about this, and I think people do that by reading your chapter and other sources that are available. But I'm also wondering, because every parent, of course, well, perhaps not of course, but there are cases where it doesn't happen, but one would expect parents to be interested in children in general. Most of us are indeed parents and develop the desire, but to take it on as a profession, which you have done, what is it that prompted you to do that?
Well, I was, in part, I was very fortunate in being brought up, as you were, by very loving parents who also helped to develop what could be called my fantasy life, creating things, making cities and out of blocks and sod on the living room floor and so forth. Just a wonderful exploratory area. But I was actually in the field of anthropology and working on educational planning internationally in various countries. And the more I studied educational planning, the more I realized that we were really late, that the problems of children's poor achievement in school wasn't just that the schools were poor, but the children's capacities were very reduced because they were developmentally delayed. Mm-hmm. And I realized that in some countries, as we now know, anywhere from 40% to 55% of the children in low and middle income countries are very depressed in their development, very at high risk of developmental delay, or are developmentally delayed, or have become truly children with disabilities due to delays. So these are things that happened after birth.
Yeah, that's an enormous loss to humanity, of course.
A terrible
that
loss.
Brain power. Of
absolutely.
That proportion of the...
And I realized that all we were doing at education was remedial. Mm-hmm. And that the really important work that needed to be done was from preconception and prenatal care and education up through the period of 0 to 36 months and then up to 60 months. So we really needed to focus on early childhood development because the quality of our children in all countries where there is severe poverty, where there is malnutrition and stunting, all of those children are suffering today. It is a global crisis. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that, and I realized it before we had some of the research we have now that has proven that this is the case, I realized I needed to change over. And then I had been moving in that direction for some time, but I really worked at that point at the international level. And I learned at an even earlier point in research that we did in Colombia that infant stimulation, early childhood development, was absolutely critical to bring children out of malnutrition into good, well-nourished status and good developmental status. And you could do a lot after birth during the first 3 years of life. And we learned that between 1972 and 1978 in Colombia in the work of Jose Obdulio Mora, Guillermo Herrera, and the rest of us. And it was a wonderful, wonderful program. And it served as inspiration to many other programs in the world. And now we have early childhood intervention programs around the world that are patterned on a lot of the discoveries that we made in that early research.
Mm-hmm. Sounds fascinating, Emily, and I'm very glad we have your chapter in the book because it's
a joy to be there.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it starts.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So thank you very much for contributing the book, and thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.